I found the card 3 hours into my first night shift at the Crescent Hotel, taped inside Gene Sims's desk drawer like some kind of parting gift. Of course, I didn't know Gene's name then, just that whoever had this job before me left their keys on the front desk counter and their Honda Civic running in the parking lot with the door hanging open. Chelsea Henry, the hotel manager, called me that same morning. Said she had an opening for night clerk, 11 to 7. Could I start tonight? I'd been out of work for 2 weeks since the lumber mill cut another round of shifts, so I didn't ask too many questions. Just showed up at 10:30 with my social security card and a wrinkled button-down I'd found in the back of my closet. The Crescent sat on a hill overlooking downtown Eureka Springs, all limestone and Victorian gingerbread trim that probably looked impressive during the day. At night, with half the exterior lights burned out and shadows cutting across the wraparound porches, it felt like something out of a bad movie. I parked next to a rusty dumpster and walked through the employee entrance, boots echoing off tile floors that had seen better decades. Chelsea met me in the lobby, 50-something woman with steel gray hair and the kind of handshake that let you know she'd been running this place longer than I'd been alive. She wore a navy blazer that had gone out of style around the same time as the hotel's wallpaper, but everything about her said she didn't much care what anybody thought about it. "You ever work hospitality before?" she asked, leading me behind the front desk. "Some customer service at the hardware store. Nothing fancy." "Good enough. Computer systems straightforward. Check-ins, check-outs, room assignments. Most of our guests this time of year are ghost tour folks and history buffs. They tend to keep reasonable hours." She handed me a laminated badge with my name already printed on it. Drew McCarthy, night clerk. Made it feel more official than I'd expected. "Building's got quite a history," Chelsea said, adjusting her glasses. "Built in 1886 as a cancer hospital. Lot of stories attached to a place this old." The way she said it made me think there was more she wasn't telling me, but I needed the job too much to press. She walked me through the basics: how to work the ancient phone system, where to find extra towels, which credit cards the machine could actually process. Standard stuff, except for the part where she mentioned the freight elevator sometimes made noise at night. "Maintenance issue," she said. "Don't worry about it unless someone complains." Then she left me alone with a stack of paperwork and the kind of quiet that only comes with empty buildings after midnight. The lobby stretched out in front of me, all dark wood and red carpet that probably used to be elegant. A grandfather clock ticked somewhere in the shadows, and the heating system made settling noises that sounded almost like footsteps. I'd been there maybe an hour when I noticed the desk drawer stuck halfway open. Old metal thing that probably came with the building, painted over so many times the handle barely turned. Inside I found the usual office debris, dead pens, paper clips, a roll of antacids that had expired 2 years ago. That's when I saw the edge of something taped to the back wall of the drawer. Took some doing to pry it loose without tearing. Laminated card, about the size of a playing card with 9 lines of text in faded typewriter font. No header, no signature, just a list that started making my skin crawl about halfway through. Never acknowledge guests wearing clothing from before 1940. If towels are requested for room 218 after midnight, slide them under the door without knocking. The woman in the blue dress on the 4th floor is not a guest. I read it twice, then a third time. Each rule got stranger than the last. Something about the morgue elevator activating on its own. Never investigate. Don't make eye contact with children in the hallway after 3 a.m. If you hear singing from the conservatory, turn the radio up loud enough to drown it out. My hands started shaking before I got to the end. Not from fear exactly, but from that feeling you get when someone's playing a joke that's gone on too long. I'd worked enough jobs to know how new guys get treated. Usually it was something harmless. Send the rookie to find a left-handed screwdriver or ask him to check the basement for the sound stretcher. But this felt different, more elaborate. Someone had taken real time to type this up, get it laminated, tape it where only the night clerk would find it. The kind of effort that suggested either a serious commitment to hazing or something else entirely. I turned the card over. Nothing on the back except a small piece of medical tape, yellowed with age. The grandfather clock chimed twice, and I realized I'd been staring at the thing for 20 minutes. Outside, Eureka Springs was dead quiet, except for the occasional car winding up the mountain roads. Inside, the hotel settled around me with creaks and sighs that suddenly seemed a lot more ominous than they had an hour ago. I slipped the card into my shirt pocket and tried to focus on the computer screen. Occupancy report, guest messages, the usual night audit routine Chelsea had shown me, but my mind kept drifting back to those 9 lines of text. The specificity of them. Room 218, the 4th floor, after midnight, after 3 a.m. Someone had put real thought into this. Either Jean Sims, assuming that was her name, had a twisted sense of humor, or the employees here took their ghost story reputation way too seriously. Had to be hazing. What else could it be? Old hotel like this, probably full of stories and legends that got passed down through the staff. New night clerk shows up, finds the spooky rule card, gets properly freaked out, becomes part of the tradition. Maybe there was a whole betting pool going on how long I'd last before I came running to Chelsea with questions. I pulled the card out again and read through it one more time. The typewriter font looked genuinely old, not like someone had used a vintage setting on their computer. And the lamination was that thick, cloudy kind they used to do in the 80s. Before everything went digital. But that just meant whoever started this joke had been at it for a while. Probably got passed down from one night clerk to the next, each one adding their own touches to keep the legend alive. Dark humor for people who worked alone in empty buildings, trying to spook each other with elaborate ghost stories. I folded the card and stuck it back in my pocket. If they wanted to play games, I could play along. Act appropriately spooked for a few days, then let them know I was onto their little tradition. Probably get a good laugh out of everyone once the joke was over. The heating system kicked on with a metallic groan that echoed through the lobby. I turned back to the computer and got on with my shift, telling myself the prickle between my shoulder blades was just the old building settling around me. Just a joke. Had to be. The rest of the rules got stranger from there. I kept reading, squinting at the small print under the fluorescent desk lamp. My coffee had gone cold in the ceramic mug Chelsea'd left for me. One of those hotel freebies with the Crescent logo fading around the rim. The lobby felt bigger in the quiet, like the walls had stepped back a few feet when I wasn't looking. Guests inquiring about Dr. Daniel's treatments should be politely redirected to current spa services. Brochures are located in the concierge stand drawer. I glanced over at the mahogany stand by the elevator bank. Of course, there'd be a drawer I hadn't found yet, probably full of glossy pamphlets advertising hot stone massages and cucumber facials. Made sense they'd want to steer people toward actual services instead of whatever Dr. Daniel was supposed to represent. The next line made my eyebrows climb toward my hairline. Basement storage areas are strictly off-limits to all staff during thunderstorm activity. No exceptions. Well, that was specific. I'd worked warehouse jobs where certain areas got flooded during heavy rain. Maybe the Crescent had similar drainage issues. Old buildings in Arkansas weren't exactly known for their waterproofing. Still seemed like an odd thing to put on a night clerk's instruction card instead of just telling maintenance. I took another sip of the cold coffee and kept going. The taste had turned bitter, but I needed the caffeine. The crystal chandelier in the main lobby occasionally reflects images of individuals not physically present in the space. Under no circumstances should staff acknowledge these reflections with gestures or verbal communication. My hand stopped halfway to setting the mug down. I looked up at the chandelier hanging over the seating area. Massive thing, probably weighed more than my car. All those cut crystals caught the light from every angle, throwing little rainbows across the burgundy carpet. Could see myself in a dozen different facets, distorted and multiplied like a funhouse mirror. But that's all it was. Light and reflection and old glass playing tricks had to be. I forced myself to keep reading, though my shoulders had gone tight. Formaldehyde odors detected in the governor's suite require immediate notification of management and temporary closure of the affected area. Do not investigate the source personally. The chemical name hit me like a slap. I knew that smell from my grandfather's funeral home visits as a kid. Sharp, medicinal, the kind of scent that stuck in your nose for hours afterward. Why the hell would a hotel room smell like formaldehyde? And why would it happen often enough to need its own rule? My mouth felt dry despite the coffee. The final instruction took up most of the bottom half of the card, printed in slightly larger text, like someone wanted to make sure it got noticed. Under no circumstances should staff provide information regarding surgical records, patient files, or medical documentation from the facility's previous incarnation. Any requests for such information must be declined with the standard response. The hotel no longer maintains access to those historical files. Direct all inquiries to the Eureka Springs Historical Society. My brain caught on that phrase. Previous incarnation, and suddenly Chelsea's words from my interview came flooding back. We'd been sitting in her office, me in my best button-down shirt and the khakis I'd borrowed from my brother, trying to look like management material. She'd been flipping through my application, asking the usual questions about my retail experience and why I wanted to work nights. Standard stuff. Then she'd paused, set the papers down, and looked at me over those wire-rimmed glasses. "You should know this building's history," she'd said in that no-nonsense Arkansas drawl. "Most folks around here already do, but you're not local." I'd nodded, waiting. Man named Norman Daniel ran this place back in the 1930s. Called it a cancer hospital. Promised miracle cures to desperate people. Folks who'd tried everything else and had nowhere left to turn. She'd gotten up then, walked to the window overlooking the gardens. Her reflection in the glass looked tired, like she'd told this story too many times. Hundreds of people died in these rooms, came here hoping for healing, and found nothing but false promises and suffering. Daniel was a fraud. No medical training, no real treatments. Just a charlatan taking advantage of human hope. The way she'd said it, flat and matter-of-fact, had made my skin crawl even in the afternoon sunlight. But I'd needed the job, and dead charlatans from the 30s seemed like ancient history. Now, sitting alone in the lobby at 1:30 in the morning, that history felt a lot less ancient. I set the laminated card on the desk blotter, pushing it away from me like it might bite. The fluorescent light hummed overhead, and somewhere in the building's depths, the heating system kicked on with a metallic groan. This had to be a joke. Some kind of initiation ritual for new night staff. See how long the rookie lasted before running screaming into the parking lot. Jean Sims, whoever she was, probably left this thing behind as a parting gift. Maybe even made it up herself on the computer in the back office. The alternative didn't bear thinking about. I leaned back in the desk chair, listening to it creak under my weight. The lobby stretched out in front of me, all shadow and amber light, elegant and ordinary. Just another old hotel in a tourist town, full of antiques and atmosphere, but nothing more sinister than overpriced room service and thin walls. Had to be. But I couldn't quite shake the memory of Chelsea's expression when she told me about Norman Daniel, like she was delivering a warning instead of just sharing local history. And I couldn't forget the way she'd emphasized that hundreds had died here, their hope exploited by someone who saw their desperation as profit. I picked up my coffee mug, grimaced at the cold liquid inside, and tried to focus on something normal. The computer screen showed 3 reservations for tomorrow. Today, technically. A couple from Little Rock celebrating their anniversary, a businessman from Memphis, and a family driving through from Texas. Regular people doing regular things. Nothing to do with fraudulent doctors or mysterious smells or reflections that weren't supposed to exist. The card sat there on the desk like an accusation, its laminated surface catching the overhead light. Part of me wanted to crumple it up and toss it in the wastebasket, pretend I'd never found it. But Chelsea ran a tight operation. She'd probably ask about the night clerk instructions during my next shift. Better to play along with the gag, act like I took it seriously, show I was a team player who could handle a little workplace hazing. Even if the rules made my skin crawl and my coffee taste like ash in my mouth. 1:47 came and went like any other minute that night. I was sitting at the front desk scrolling through some pointless training modules on the computer when I heard it. The elevator. Not the guest elevator. That one I could see from where I sat, doors closed tight, brass call buttons dark. This was different. Deeper, like it was coming from somewhere below the lobby floor. I looked up and saw the brass dial above the other set of doors. The morgue elevator. The needle was moving, ticking down past L for lobby, past B for basement, down to what looked like a sub-basement level I didn't even know existed. The whole dial shuddered when it stopped, like whatever machinery was down there had to work extra hard to make the trip. My mouth went dry. I'd read about this elevator and those rules, but seeing it move on its own was something else entirely. The brass needle hung there for maybe 30 seconds, long enough for me to start wondering what the hell was down there and why an elevator would be running itself at this hour. Then it started climbing back up. I watched every floor, sub-basement to basement, basement to lobby. The mechanism groaned like it was hauling something heavy, something that didn't want to be moved. When the needle settled on L, I heard the soft ding of arrival. The doors slid open. Empty car. Nothing but that burnished brass interior and the soft glow of the overhead light. But the smell that rolled out hit me like a physical thing. Copper, sharp and metallic, mixed with something chemical. Antiseptic, maybe. The kind of smell you'd expect in a hospital, or worse. My brain caught up then. Rule 4. Something about the morgue elevator and not getting on after midnight. I'd skimmed past it, figured it was just part of the elaborate prank. But standing there, breathing in that smell, my legs moved without permission. 3 quick steps backward until my hip bumped the front desk. The elevator doors waited. Patient as death. I stared into that empty car and wondered what would have happened if I'd been standing closer. If I'd been the type to investigate instead of retreat. The brass interior gleamed under that pale light, and for just a second I could swear I saw something else reflected in those walls. Shapes that didn't belong. Movement that made my stomach clench. The doors slid shut with a soft whisper, and the dial went dark. I stayed pressed against the desk until my heart slowed down. Told myself it was just building maintenance. Old hotels had all kinds of automated systems. Maybe the basement had some kind of refrigeration unit that needed checking. Maybe the antiseptic smell was just cleaning supplies. Maybe I was losing my mind on my first night. 2:15 arrived with a different kind of trouble altogether. I'd gotten back to the training modules trying to focus on policies about lost keycards and checkout procedures. Anything to keep my mind off elevators that ran themselves and smells that shouldn't exist. The lobby felt too quiet, like the building was holding its breath. That's when I heard the footsteps. Soft, deliberate. The kind of careful walk someone uses when they're trying not to wake anybody up. I looked toward the main entrance, but the glass doors were still locked tight, security chain in place. The sound was coming from inside the building. She appeared around the corner from the guest elevator bank like she'd been staying here for years. Woman in her 40s, maybe. Hard to tell in the dim lobby lighting. She wore one of those old-fashioned dresses, navy blue with a lace collar and pearl buttons running up the front. Her hair was done in finger waves, pinned neat and proper like something out of an old movie. The whole look should have seemed like a costume, but on her it just looked normal. Natural. She walked straight to the front desk with the confidence of someone who knew exactly where she was going. "Good evening." Her voice was soft, polite. Had that formal quality you don't hear much anymore. "I'm Hazel Garza. I'd like my room key, please." I blinked, trying to shift gears. Real guest. Real problem I could actually solve. "Of course. What's your room number?" 218. She folded her hands on the counter, patient as could be. I have an early treatment scheduled with Dr. Daniel tomorrow morning. I don't want to oversleep. Dr. Daniel. The name hit me like a cold breeze, but I couldn't place why. I turned to the computer and started pulling up the guest registry. Let me just check on that for you, Mrs. Garza. Miss, she corrected gently. Miss Garza. Right. Sorry. My fingers moved over the keyboard, but room 218 wasn't showing any current reservations. Actually, the whole second floor was listed as under renovation. Had been for the past month, according to what I was seeing. I'm not finding you in our system, Miss Garza. Are you sure about the room number? Quite sure. Her voice stayed level, but there was something underneath it now. Not impatience exactly. More like confusion. I've stayed in 218 many times. Dr. Daniel always reserves it for his patients. I looked up from the screen to explain about the renovations, and that's when I saw her hands. They were still folded on the counter, still positioned like she was waiting patiently for service, but they weren't quite there. Not completely. The fingers looked thin, translucent, like I was seeing them through water. And at the wrists, where her sleeves ended, they just faded, dissolved into nothing. My throat went tight. I blinked hard, thinking maybe it was the lighting, the fatigue. Too much coffee and not enough sleep making my eyes play tricks. But when I looked again, her hands were still disappearing. Miss Garza, I said, keeping my voice as steady as I could manage. I'm afraid room 218 is undergoing maintenance right now. Has been for several weeks, but I'd be happy to set you up in another room. We have some lovely accommodations on the third floor. No. The word came out sharp, cutting through my professional patter. I need 218. Dr. Daniel is expecting me there. She stared at me then, and I realized her eyes weren't quite focusing right. They were looking at me, but also through me. Like she was seeing something else entirely. Something that existed in the same space I occupied, but wasn't actually me. The treatments are very important, she continued, her voice taking on that distant quality again. I've been feeling poorly, and Dr. Daniel says he can help, but I must be in 218. That's where he keeps his equipment. I glanced down at the computer screen, trying to think of what to say. How to explain to someone who clearly wasn't entirely present that the room she wanted didn't exist anymore, at least not in any way that mattered. When I looked back up, she was gone. Not walked away. Not stepped back into the shadows. Just gone. Like she'd never been there at all. The lobby felt different without her. Emptier, but also somehow more solid. Like reality had snapped back into place after being stretched thin. I could smell my own coffee again, could hear the building's heating system cycling on, normal sounds, normal smells, but the computer screen was different. I stared at the guest registry, scrolling up and down through the entries. There it was, plain as day. Garza, Hazel, room 218, check-in date, November 3rd, 1938. My hands were shaking when I reached for the coffee mug. 3 o'clock rolled around with the kind of punctuality that made my stomach drop. The phone rang, that old rotary beast on the front desk that sounded like a fire alarm in the quiet. Front desk. My voice came out steadier than I felt. Fresh towels, please. Woman's voice, soft and polite. Room 218. The blood in my veins turned to ice water. I stared at the guest registry, at Hazel Garza's name written in that careful script from 1938. My pen had left a coffee ring right next to her check-in date. I'll bring those right up, I managed. The line went dead. Not hung up, dead. Like the connection just stopped existing. I sat there for a minute watching the receiver in my hand. The dial tone hummed steady and normal, but my fingers wouldn't let go of the plastic. The rules card sat next to the phone where I'd left it, Jean's handwriting staring up at me. If guests call requesting towels or amenities, deliver them. Slide items under the door. Do not knock. Do not wait for acknowledgement. Simple enough. Just towels under a door. Nothing more complicated than room service, really. The supply closet was down the hall past the elevator. I found a stack of white bath towels, soft and thick, with the hotel's monogram embroidered in gold thread. My hands moved automatic-like while my brain tried to process what I was doing, delivering towels to a woman who'd been dead for 80-odd years. But the registry said she was here. The phone call proved it. And the rules were clear about following instructions. I took the elevator up to the second floor. The hallway stretched out under dim sconces, carpet muffling my footsteps. Room 218 sat at the end, door painted the same forest green as all the others. Nothing special about it. Nothing that screamed haunted or dangerous or wrong. Just a hotel room door. I knelt down and pushed the towels underneath, watching the white terry cloth disappear into the dark gap. They slid easy, like someone was pulling them from the other side. The fabric vanished completely, swallowed up by whatever waited in that room. I stood up, brushing dust off my khakis. Mission accomplished. Time to head back downstairs and pretend this was all perfectly normal. Just another night shift task, checking items off the invisible list. That's when I heard it. Drew. My actual name. Not sir, not front desk, not hey you. Drew. Whispered soft and clear through the door like someone was standing right on the other side with their mouth pressed to the wood. Nobody at this hotel knew my name except Chelsea, and she was home asleep. The guest registry didn't list employee information. The name tag on my blazer just said front desk staff in generic block letters. But somebody in room 218 knew exactly who I was. My legs moved before my brain caught up. I turned and ran down that hallway like my ass was on fire, past the elevator, past the supply closet, past everything until I hit the stairwell door and took those steps 3 at a time. My dress shoes slapped against concrete, echoing in the narrow space. I didn't stop until I was back in the lobby, hands pressed flat against the front desk, breathing hard. The chandelier caught my eye first. That massive crystal thing hanging over the seating area, all cut glass and brass fittings. It was reflecting light that wasn't there. I looked up at it direct and saw my own face staring back, distorted in the faceted crystal. Normal enough. But in my peripheral vision, something else was happening. Movement, shapes, people. When I shifted my gaze to the lobby itself, it was empty. Just the burgundy chairs and coffee tables, the oriental rug with its faded patterns, the tall windows looking out at the dark Arkansas hills. Nothing moving except the dust motes floating through the air. But in the chandelier's reflection, the place was packed. Men in 3-piece suits walked across carpet that showed crowded and alive in the crystal. Women in white nursing uniforms pushed wheelchairs through spaces that remained empty when I looked at them straight on. Patients in hospital gowns shuffled between chairs that held nobody in the real world, but somehow supported full conversations in the reflection above my head. I stood there like a statue, neck craned back, watching 2 different versions of the same room exist in the same space. The chandelier showed me what used to be, or maybe what still was in whatever dimension ghosts called home. A working hospital, a place full of people going about their business, treating patients, having conversations, living their lives. Except they weren't living anything anymore. One of the reflected figures looked up at me, a woman in a nurse's cap standing near the windows. She raised her hand slow and deliberate, fingers spread wide. A wave, a greeting, an invitation. My own hand twitched at my side. Natural response, the kind of politeness drilled into you from childhood. Someone waves, you wave back. Basic human courtesy. But Jean's rule echoed in my head. Never wave back at reflections. I kept my hands pressed flat against the desk surface, knuckles white with the effort. The nurse kept waving, patient and persistent. Other figures in the chandelier started to notice me. Heads turned, eyes focused. More hands began to rise. A whole crowd of dead people trying to get my attention. I forced myself to look down at the desk, at the guest registry, at anything except that crystal chandelier and its impossible reflection. But I could feel them up there, moving through their eternal routines, going about whatever business keeps the dead occupied during the long hours between midnight and dawn. The chandelier tinkled soft above my head, crystal pieces touching in a breeze that didn't exist. The sound was almost musical, almost welcoming, almost like voices calling my name. I kept my eyes on the desk and my hands where they belonged, watching two realities overlap in the space above me while I stood invisible to most of them. Just another night shift worker trying to make it to morning without losing his mind or his soul. 4:30 in the morning, the formaldehyde hit me like walking face first into a brick wall. I'd been sitting at the front desk, half dozing over another pointless training module about guest satisfaction protocols when that smell rolled through the lobby like fog. Chemical sharp, medical clean, the kind of antiseptic stench that made your nose burn and your eyes water without warning. My chair scraped against the marble floor as I shot to my feet. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to get away from that smell, but my brain kept circling back to the rules. Rule number 4. When you smell formaldehyde, open the windows in the governor's suite immediately. The elevator was too slow. I took the stairs 2 at a time, my dress shoes slipping on the worn carpet runners. The smell got stronger with each floor, thick enough to taste now, coating the back of my throat like medicine. By the time I reached the 4th floor, I was breathing through my mouth and trying not to gag. The governor's suite sat at the end of the hallway, door standing slightly ajar. Dim light spilled through the gap, casting a yellow rectangle across the burgundy carpet. I should have knocked. Should have announced myself. Should have done a dozen things differently. Instead, I charged straight in and threw open the first window I could reach. The night air rushed in, cool and clean, cutting through that chemical fog like a blade. I was reaching for the second window when I realized I wasn't alone. A man stood beside the 4-poster bed, his back to me. Tall guy, maybe 6'2", wearing a pristine white coat that looked like it had just come from the dry cleaner. His gray hair was slicked back with something that caught the lamplight, and his hands, Christ, his hands were moving with the kind of precise, practiced motions I'd seen surgeons use on medical shows. The nightstand beside the bed was covered with instruments, surgical instruments, scalpels and forceps and things I couldn't name, all arranged in neat rows like he was preparing for an operation. The metal gleamed under the amber light from the bedside lamp. I must have made some sound, a gasp maybe, or just the creak of floorboards under my feet. The man turned around, and I got my first good look at his face. Pale blue eyes, cold as winter sky. Long face with a prominent brow that cast shadows over those eyes. Thin lips that curved into something that might have been a smile if you didn't look too close. The kind of face that belonged on old medical textbooks, all authority and false reassurance. "Ah," he said, and his voice was smooth as honey over gravel. "You must be here for your treatment." I opened my mouth to tell him he was wrong, that I was just the night clerk, that he shouldn't be in this room at all. But nothing came out. The words stuck in my throat like I'd swallowed paste. He stepped closer and I caught sight of a name tag pinned to his coat. Dr. Seth Daniel, it read in neat black letters. The name hit me like a punch to the gut. I knew that name, not from any guest registry or hotel records, but from somewhere deeper. Somewhere that made my skin crawl and my pulse hammer in my ears. "The tumors won't remove themselves," he continued, gesturing toward the bed with one of those surgical instruments, a scalpel that caught the light and threw it back in sharp flashes. "I've been waiting for you. We have so much work to do." That broke whatever spell had been holding me frozen. I slammed the door and pressed my back against it, feeling the solid wood against my shoulder blades. My heart was beating so hard I could feel it in my throat, in my fingertips, in the space behind my eyes. Footsteps inside the room, slow, deliberate, coming toward the door. The handle turned against my back, metal clicking as it moved. I pressed harder against the door, my dress shoes sliding on the carpet as I tried to find purchase. The handle kept turning, kept clicking, the sound loud as gunshots in the hallway. Then it stopped. I stayed there, pressed against that door like my life depended on it. Maybe it did. My shirt was soaked with sweat under my blazer, and I could taste copper in my mouth where I'd bitten my tongue without realizing it. Every breath came shallow and quick, like I'd just run a marathon. Minutes passed. Could have been 5. Could have been 50. Time moved differently when you were standing in a hotel hallway at 4:30 in the morning, holding a door shut against something that shouldn't exist. The silence from inside the room was worse than the footsteps had been. At least with the footsteps, I knew where he was. Now I had to imagine. Was he still standing by the door, waiting for me to move? Had he gone back to his instruments, preparing for the next poor soul who wandered into his operating theater? Or was he doing something else entirely? Something I didn't want to think about. My legs started shaking. Not from fear, though there was plenty of that, but from the strain of holding myself against the door. The marble floor was cold under my palms, where I'd braced my hands against it, and I could smell my own sweat mixing with the lingering traces of formaldehyde that still clung to my clothes. That's when it hit me. Really hit me, like a freight train to the chest. The rules weren't a joke. Gene Sims hadn't left them as some kind of elaborate prank for the new guy. Chelsea wasn't in on some company-wide hazing ritual. Those 17 rules weren't suggestions or guidelines or cute hotel traditions. They were survival instructions. And I'd just met the reason why. Dr. Seth Daniel, the charlatan who'd killed hundreds of desperate patients with his false promises and miracle cures. The monster who'd turned the governor's suite into his own private butcher shop, preying on people who came to him seeking hope and finding only death. He was real. He was here. And if I hadn't followed rule number 4, if I hadn't opened those windows when the formaldehyde smell hit, I might have ended up on that nightstand with the rest of his instruments. Dawn broke over the Ozark Mountains at 6:47 in the morning, and I watched every supernatural presence retreat like smoke being sucked through a vent. The change came sudden. One minute I was sitting at the front desk with my hands still shaking from Dr. Daniel's instruments, watching the chandelier throw its fractured light across empty air where his patients had been standing. Next minute, that light shifted, got warmer, cleaner, natural. The shadows in the corners pulled back to normal shadow depth. The temperature stopped feeling like it was being measured in a morgue. I knew the exact moment because I'd been staring at the old clock above the elevator bank, counting down the minutes until my shift ended. 6:46, still watching the chandelier reflect nothing but empty space where Hazel Garza and the others had been. 6:47, and suddenly the lobby felt like just a lobby again. The chandelier crystals caught the early morning light streaming through the tall windows and threw it back in ordinary rainbows across the marble floor. No overlapping realities, no glimpses of people who shouldn't exist, just hotel furniture and morning sunshine and the kind of silence that came from an empty building instead of the kind that came from holding your breath. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I kept flexing my fingers, trying to get the feeling back in them, but they just trembled against the desktop like I'd been holding something heavy for too long. Of course, I hadn't been holding anything heavier than a pen all night. Just fear, I guess. Fear weighs more than you'd think when you're carrying it for 6 straight hours. The front desk computer hummed its normal electronic hum. No phantom phone calls. No guest requests from rooms that shouldn't have guests. The elevators sat quiet behind their brass doors. Both of them, the guest elevator and that service elevator I'd learned to fear. Even the air smelled different. Less like old medicine and formaldehyde, more like furniture polish and carpet cleaner. I slumped back in the desk chair and let myself breathe for what felt like the first time since midnight. 7 o'clock brought Chelsea Henry through the front doors with the kind of punctuality that suggested she'd done this walk 1,000 times before. She looked exactly like what you'd expect from a hotel manager in rural Arkansas. Practical blazer over a white blouse, sensible shoes that didn't make noise on the marble, silver hair cut in a no-nonsense bob that probably took her 5 minutes to style every morning. Wire-rimmed glasses that caught the light when she turned her head to survey the lobby. Morning drew. She set her purse behind the counter like she belonged there. Which, I suppose, she did. How was your first night? I opened my mouth to answer that question, then realized I had no idea where to start. With Hazel Garza asking for towels? With the service elevator that shouldn't run? With Dr. Daniel and his collection of surgical tools? Found the rules, I said instead. Chelsea nodded like she'd expected that answer. Good. Jean leave anything else useful in that desk? Just the card. I pulled it from my shirt pocket, still laminated, still listing those 10 rules in Jean's careful handwriting. The paper had gotten warm from being pressed against my chest all night. Figured you'd want to know I read them. Did you follow them? The way she asked that question made my stomach tighten. Not like she was testing me exactly. More like she was assessing damage, like asking someone who'd walked through a minefield whether they'd stepped on anything that clicked. Best I could. I set the card on the desktop between us. Had some close calls. Chelsea picked up the card and examined it like she was reading it for the first time, even though she'd probably seen it dozens of times before. Her expression didn't change as she went through the list, just that same neutral, professional look she'd worn during my interview. Which ones gave you trouble? The towel delivery. 3 o'clock phone call. I rubbed my eyes, suddenly feeling how tired I was. Had to figure out Rule 4 the hard way when the formaldehyde smell hit. Dr. Daniel, she said, not like a question. You know about him. Chelsea folded the card and handed it back to me. I know about all of them. She poured herself coffee from the pot I'd made around 4, back when I thought caffeine might help me stay alert enough to survive until morning. The ceramic mug looked small in her hands, and she held it like someone who'd been drinking hotel coffee for decades. Dr. Daniel's patients never stopped returning for treatments that killed them the first time, she said, settling into the chair across from the front desk. Tuberculosis, mostly. Some pneumonia cases. This was back when the Crescent operated as a cancer hospital, 1937 through 40. Dr. Daniel specialized in experimental procedures. I waited for her to continue, but she just sipped her coffee and watched me over the rim of her glasses. Experimental how? The kind that made good money but poor medicine. Chelsea set her mug down on the desktop. Dr. Daniel convinced desperate people to pay for treatments that had no chance of working. Radiation therapy with equipment he barely understood. Surgical procedures he'd only read about in journals. Chemical treatments he mixed himself. The formaldehyde smell came back to me, that sharp medical reek that had rolled through the lobby like fog. They died here. Most of them. The ones who lived long enough went home to die in their own beds. But they all came back eventually. Chelsea's voice stayed level, matter of fact. Like she was explaining hotel policy instead of talking about ghosts. They never stopped hoping the treatments might work if they just tried one more time. I thought about the surgical instruments I'd seen on Dr. Daniel's nightstand, the bone saw, the scalpels arranged in perfect rows. The rules keep them away. The rules keep the living separated from the dead's endless, desperate hope. Chelsea finished her coffee and stood up. That's what makes them dangerous, Drew. Not anger or malice. Hope. They're still hoping Dr. Daniel can cure them, still believing the next treatment might be the one that works. She walked to the tall windows and looked out at the Ozark Mountains, where the morning light was starting to burn off the valley mist. Hope's a beautiful thing in the living. In the dead, it becomes something else entirely. Chelsea turned back to face me, and her expression had shifted into something I recognized from my interview. Professional, decisive, the look of someone about to make an offer. I'm going to give you a choice, Drew. Same choice I gave Jean when she started. Same one I've given every night clerk who's worked this desk. She reached into her blazer and pulled out a thick folder, maybe 40 pages, bound in the hotel's standard blue cover. You can quit right now with full pay for last night's shift, and I'll find someone else to handle the position. The folder looked official. Employee handbook, probably. The kind of thing most hotels gave you on your first day, full of policies about vacation time and dress codes. Or you can stay and learn the 47 additional rules not included on that laminated card. 47 additional rules. I stared at the folder in her hands, trying to process that number. Each one, Chelsea continued, was written after someone failed to survive learning it naturally. The weight of that statement settled over me like cold water. 47 more ways to die that I hadn't even discovered yet. 47 situations dangerous enough that someone had written them down as warnings after watching people fail to navigate them safely. Jean knew all 47. Jean knew 53. Chelsea's voice stayed neutral, but something flickered behind her glasses. She learned 6 the hard way before I could update the handbook. I looked down at the laminated card in my hands, those 10 rules that had kept me alive through one night. 10 rules that felt like walking a tightrope over a pit full of broken glass. The idea of 47 more made my stomach drop. What happens if I stay? You learn to survive here. You get good at following instructions that don't always make sense until after they save your life. Chelsea held out the folder. You help me keep this place running without losing any more employees. And if I quit? You walk away with your pay and a good reference letter. I'll make sure you find work somewhere normal. She paused. Somewhere the worst thing you'll deal with is drunk guests and broken ice machines. I thought about everything I'd witnessed throughout the night. Hazel Garza's polite voice asking for towels while her reality bled through into mine. The service elevator carrying passengers who'd been dead for 80 years. Dr. Daniel arranging his instruments on a nightstand that existed in some overlapping version of the hotel where his treatments never ended. I thought about Jean Sims abandoning her post, leaving her keys on the front desk counter and her Honda Civic running in the parking lot. She'd lasted longer than one night. Chelsea said she'd learned 53 rules total, which meant she'd survived long enough to encounter situations I couldn't even imagine yet. But something had finally broken her. Something had pushed her past whatever line separated the employees who stayed from the ones who fled. The employee handbook felt heavy in Chelsea's hands. 47 ways to die that someone else had already discovered for me. 47 situations I'd face if I stayed, written in warnings purchased with other people's blood. I could walk away, clock out, collect my pay, find a job at some normal hotel where the biggest supernatural threat was a guest who claimed their room was haunted because the air conditioner made weird noises, or I could take that handbook and learn how to navigate a place where the dead never stopped hoping for one more chance at life. My hands had finally stopped shaking. The lobby felt warm and normal in the morning light, full of ordinary shadows and everyday silence. It was easy to convince yourself, sitting there at 7 in the morning, that the night had been some kind of elaborate hallucination. But the laminated card in my pocket was real. The rules written in Jean's careful handwriting were real, and Chelsea Henry was standing there with 47 more reasons why John had eventually left her car running in the parking lot. I took the employee handbook Chelsea offered and walked to the time clock mounted beside the front desk. Clocked in for my second shift,